Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's interview about the book Regeneration and the Future of Community. Also, a warm welcome to the authors, Kotler and Christian Sarkar. Before I start with the interview, I'd like to briefly introduce the authors. Kotler is known as the father of marketing. His book, Marketing Management, has been published all over the world, currently in its 16th edition, and he has published over 80 other books. He has developed the fields place marketing, social marketing, and demarketing, and he has received 22 honorary degrees from abroad. Kotler has retired a few years ago from teaching marketing at the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University. And ever since, he's very busy with various different projects, Zoom calls, and other interactive formats. Christian Sarkar is author, entrepreneur, artist, and consultant. And he's the co-founder of the Regenerative Marketing Institute, same as Kotler and Enrico Foglia. He's involved with many different projects, mainly nonprofit and public education projects. Great to have you here today. My name is Julia Schlader. I've been working in marketing and sales for over 12 years internationally, and I'm very honored to be holding this interview today. And dear viewers, just so you know, whenever you have a question during the interview, please type it into the chat window, and Kotler and Christian Sarkar will answer them at the end of the interview. So let's start with the first question. And also, Kotler and Christian Sarkar, I know you have prepared slides again. So whenever you want to share them or show them, please let us know. So the first question I have for you is, how would you describe the concept of regeneration, and what inspired you to actually write the book?
Yes, Julia, it's nice to be working with you and the many good questions you sent to us. The previous book Christian Sarkar and I wrote was called Brand Activism, which was how could companies come together to use their organization to make society more progressive rather than regressive. Now, things like supporting democracy, fighting injustice, and so on, were issues that we dealt with in that book. Now, this book is looking at trust and longevity and so on, and we are interested in looking at how seeing companies in a non-traditional way, especially when we are trying to figure out how to bring regeneration into the societies, the countries, and the world, and so on. Now, I might just say that I originally started to look at places, which would be communities and cities and towns, in my book called Marketing Places. And in this case, we got in touch with the mayor of Palermo, the city that is the capital of Sicily. And the mayor said he would help us, and he wants our help in regenerating Palermo, a city which has had great history, Roman and Greek ruins and so on, and they don't want to lose these ruins, and they want to regenerate Palermo. And so Christian and Enrico, our other partner, went to Palermo to conduct some research and make recommendations, and hence the picture you see is of the book. Now, what do we mean by regeneration? It's a shift in our paradigm from most companies today think extractively, how to extract value from the nature and from other companies. And we're for a stronger paradigm, which is to work to regenerate and share and build a better world. And our guideline is the common good. In other words, all businesses should be asking, what are you doing about the common good, if anything? I mean, you're helping meet some needs, but what your company has an impact on nature. It has an impact on so many other things that are costs, which you as a company don't even have to pay. So we want to be sure that the net impact you have is a good one on the common good. So that's brought us to this. Now we're going to go to the next slide. Christian.
One of the things we wanted to do was make sure that there was no room for greenwashing, because part of the problem that we see in the business world that, it's very easy to, do the PR on things and actually not be regenerative and not be sustainable. So that's why we sort of defined regeneration in a way that prevents greenwashing. And so we say there is no regeneration without the regeneration of the common good. And I think that's part of this, is that it's a paradigm shift. It's systemic change, bottom, top, middle. It's about regenerating communities and businesses, and we start from the bottom. So we define 9 domains of the common good: social, economic, nature, of course, at the center of everything, work, culture, media, law, technology, and politics. And these domains are interconnected, and they're sort of intrinsically, embedded together. So you can't really pick one and say, well, I'm just going to work on this one and not the other ones. You've got to work on all of them simultaneously. So you can't regenerate one without the other. If we can have the next slide, we'll see what I mean. So these are the 9 domains. And what we said is, these things happen across 5 worlds. The world of the individual, the community, of course, at work, the nation, and then, of course, at the planetary level. So, of course, businesses and governments need to become regenerative as well. And we can get into that later, but that's sort of the scope of this book. To understand the process, we learned from the indigenous people of the planet that regeneration isn't a one-time thing. It's a process of protecting, repairing, investing, and transforming. And you have to apply these 4 steps to the 9 domains of the common good. The next slide, and that kind of shows you sort of this process. If you don't mind, the next slide. Yeah. So it's protecting. So, any dimension, any of those 9 dimensions we talked about, from politics to social to economics to nature, of course, beginning with nature. We have to protect the degradation and the degeneration. We have to repair what we've done wrong. We have to invest in the future, invest in culture, invest in work, invest in nature, invest in just economics, and of course, transform our society to a regenerative one, where we actually build a future worth living. So we have to ask, how do we as an individual, as a community, as a business, as a government, as a global institution, how do we protect the common good, repair the common good, invest in the common good, and transform to the common good? And that's sort of how we frame the book.
Great. Thank you very much. Also, you mentioned the topic, like this subtitle, Future of Community, already a few times. So how can actually regeneration affect the future of community from your viewpoint, and which challenges will there be specifically?
Well, I'll try to answer that because we are facing a lot of challenges. You can just hear the news of the day, and we know that cities and others are losing. They're experiencing floods and fires and windstorms and hurricanes and so on. In Canada, the burning forests. So no one is really free from these tragedies. And meanwhile, the cities of the global north in general are facing very common problems of overcrowding, pollution, congestion, housing shortages, urban decay, and obsolete infrastructure. And Christian can add some more things that are happening.
Sure. The idea was that in business school, we teach our students how to create business value, but nowhere do we teach how to create value for the community. And so that was one of our purposes, is to say, okay, let's rediscover this idea that public value creation for the common good is something that can be taught. It's something that should be done. And if we're not doing it, why aren't we doing it? So our book examines the various methods used to build community wealth and regenerate public value. So here's a diagram. The next slide shows you sort of the idea of regenerative economics. Yeah, that good. One. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, exactly.
If you look at this, it sort of gives us a picture of what a community will have to be doing. For example, it could be Palermo or any community. First of all, it would have to do local investment from the companies and others in that area. And it's not just one time, but reinvesting. But whatever is invested has to then circulate through the economy and creating value in various sectors of the economy. Meanwhile, it's not enough to depend on just local investment. You have to maximize outside investment, make a good case that to others outside that they're going to benefit too by helping in the community value creation process. So for many years, our institutions have been working to mitigate climate change, but the results have not been very good yet. And there's been a continuous destruction of our ecosystems, which we need to keep us alive. And so leaders and businesses have unfortunately neglected the very ecosystems that they depend on. And we talk about a dying planet, and they're aware of that. And yet problems get worse. Income inequality keeps getting more and more extreme. And money is a scarce thing. And business, of course, wants to make profit. It doesn't want to give away its profit. But how can we get companies to recognize that they're destroying themselves as well as others by not participating? But Christian will add more to that idea.
And also one thing I want to add on, because at the moment you mentioned the work we can do in communities, but also, and especially like from a company viewpoint, but maybe also a different insight to our viewers, like what can we as individuals do to influence this world and make it a better place actually for all of us?
Yes.
Sure. So I'll get back to that. I mean, part of the problem is that our institutions and our leaders, and we're kind of jokingly, but actually very seriously calling them misleaders, because we think they're part of the problem. For the long time, the attitude of the energy community, for example, in particular the fossil fuel industry, was that climate change wasn't even real. And now it's gone from, it's not real to, we can't do much about it, so let's keep going. And let's just try to figure out some way to do carbon capture, and let's invest in that, and that'll solve the problem down the road. So we have had very irresponsible leadership at every level. And of course, as individuals, we've got to go, hey, this kind of, let's put it this way, destructive thinking where you're not working for the common good also destroys the public trust. And without public trust, of course, markets don't work. We can no longer operate as a business or as a country, So, that's part of the problem. That, and Phil likes to say that there is no new normal, that where nothing is normal anymore. Go ahead, Phil. Tell them about that.
Well, we're going to be shifting from just having polycrises, a number of crises, into a permacrisis world where disasters are the norm. In other words, we're not returning to the norm, but the norm will be disasters. We are not separate from nature. We are not separate from the ecosystems that give us our daily breath and bread. We are not separate from each other, and the web of life connects all of us. Surely COVID should have taught us that, but it did not. Christian?
Yeah. So our response so far has not been, especially if you look at COVID, one that inspires a lot of confidence in the future. COVID, if one thing COVID should have shown us, that we can work together, that we can come together to solve problems, and yet it became something very divisive, and income inequality actually increased during COVID. So you could say that economic inequality and climate change are both symptoms of market failure, and they won't be solved using the same old business as usual, the current system. So at a time when we have to work together as nations, now more we have to come together. Instead, we find countries turning inward, building walls, and no wall is going to stop the climate crisis because we're interconnected. Phil?
As individuals, we can start organizing for change by demanding better from our institutions. And I mean, the media should be held more responsible, politicians more accountable, and rejecting the distractions that keep us from doing the real jobs. We just can't let our focus to be manipulated by fake news and manufactured controversies.
Phil and I wrote an article with Carthy on our Wicked 7 website about building a movement of movements. That really individuals need to come together to help each other, and companies need to do this as well. So if it's interesting that companies can come together if they want a tax break. They work very well together when it comes to something like that, but they can't seem to work together for the common good, and that's what matters. Politics matters, education matters, the truth matters, and working together matters. That's, I think, very important.
And how realistic do you think it is for individuals to actually impact those areas mentioned in a positive way?
Well, I think individuals can make all the difference. Margaret Mead said that all it takes is a few individuals. And if you look at who is actually running the world, it's just a few individuals. Of course, they happen to have a lot of money, and they happen to own the media, and they happen to have a lot of power. But, part of it is educating each other that, hey, we don't have to. And if you look at it this way. Every time there's a big crisis and things fall apart, and you have a storm and a flood or a hurricane, and the government's not available, what happens? People come together and help each other. The minute things get back to normal, we stop helping each other. We stop being neighbors. That's part of this fundamental shift that we've got to go, hey, you know what? We have community and the common good as sort of the baseline of our lives. And why do we forget that as soon as we go back to work?
That's very beautiful how you summarized it. So you mentioned already a few areas that are heavily affected by regeneration. What would you say are the main ones, or the ones you haven't mentioned yet?
Go ahead.
Ben, you want to go on this?
Yeah.
Well, everything is touched by regeneration. And in a way, that's what those 9 dimensions were. If you want to go back to the chart with the 9 dimensions, I think it's actually a good chart to have on the screen here. That one there. So if we're saying that we want total regeneration, that really means that we've got to look at all these things simultaneously. We've got to rethink how it is that we behave, not just with each other in communities, but how do businesses behave? And because we can compartmentalize our thinking, many people don't actually connect, for example, inequality with the climate crisis. And yet they're all caused by the same idea that we're separate from nature and we're separate from each other. And part of the problem is, the power in this world, let's say the hedge fund managers and Silicon Valley executives who are sort of running the world, let's say, they've all bought escape bolt holes, farms in New Zealand with landing strips so they can escape. But they don't understand that there is no escape. We're all in this together. And Elon Musk, for example, isn't going to find Mars as fun as he imagined. And Jeff Bezos can't stay on his yacht forever. So I'm kind of kidding. But the idea here is we've got to hold our billionaires accountable, and maybe they should pay a little more in taxes as well. Phil?
Yeah, well, what we are proposing in the book is a new lens for understanding our future and the failure of the past as well. And we learn a lot from the indigenous people of the world and how to renew and keep and live with nature and learn from nature and so on. So without a shift in our mindset, there's no future. Not even we are wondering, we want to leave the world for our children in a way that it's at least as good as our world was, but hopefully better. So this leads us to the next slide.
You're going to have to jump a few slides here. Yeah. There's another slide, the one that has the two. That one there.
Now, that's going to be confusing to people, so you explain it, Christian.
Sure. These are sort of two processes that we've sort of studied and come up with. And of course, these are guidelines. But if you're an individual, for example, that's a leader in an organization, or an individual that's a leader in your community, these are two sort of exploratory guidelines for you to look at how can I regenerate my organization and how can I regenerate my community. And of course, the book goes into detail for each one of these things, but these are available on our Regeneration Marketing Institute. You just download them for, just by going there. So that's part of the thing here is we want people to go, there's not one way. It's not our book that matters. It's not what we're saying that matters. It's really what you think in your community that matters, and what the people think. And how can you come together and break the walls that separate you from your neighbor to start helping each other as if the world's on fire, because it is.
Thank you. So when we think more globally now and at all the countries that exist, which countries or even, let's say, industries would you say are driving regenerative ideas, and which ones are still lacking behind?
Sure.
Well, we have to see which countries are actually generating the major harm to the universe and the planet. One can argue that China and India are polluting the planet today, but that doesn't. That has to include us as well, because what we did in the West was we outsourced manufacturing. And therefore, we outsourced the pollution that goes with manufacturing to other countries in Asia and elsewhere, rather than bear that ourselves. Now, it is not surprising that countries like Germany are serious. Fortunately, there are countries that are serious about reducing the carbon impact. Germany is one example. But the U.S. has been very reluctant to add new taxes to do the job. Recently, for example, several of the southern states in the United States are actually adding taxes to people who buy the new automobiles, the electric vehicles. Now, in other words, they're trying to slow down good vehicles from being the ones we use in order to protect the interests of the fuel industry. So what are we going to do about that?
And,
we also have to ask, why businesses are not supporting democracy itself even. Do they honestly think that autocracies are in the better interest of business? Oligarchies are not good for the future. In fact, they are not interested in the common good by definition. And actually, we have a lot of oligarchies. Most industries are oligopolized. In other words, there's just 2 or 3 leaders of an industry, and they're making policy. And in a sense, it's not being made democratically at all.
Yeah, Jimmy Carter said that we're not a democracy, but an oligarchy. So that's sort of interesting. But going back to your question on which industries are currently driving regenerative ideas and which ones are lagging behind, of course, fossil fuels and agriculture and fast fashion and transportation, mining, fishing, all these extractive industries are the ones that are lagging behind. In fact, they're pushing for more of the same. But it's not just the carbon footprint. And that's the other problem when we focus on just the carbon footprint, because it's also pollution, pesticides, deforestation, the waste that comes from we're putting sewage down into our rivers and killing the ocean. And the ocean's, of course, boiling, and we've all seen the pictures of the dead fish washing up on the shores. So it's like, how can we live in a swimming pool? How can we go swimming in a swimming pool if everybody's emptying all their waste into the swimming pool? It's just not going to hold. And there is no other swimming pool we can move to. Forget Mars, Elon. So I'm just, again, kidding there. But yeah.
So, but it's very important to recognize that the force for good could be the government. I mean, that's not normal if the business community is not organized well enough to preserve the common good and contribute to it. But the government, is our government or any government working for the common good or working for special interests? Every citizen should ask that question, because the role of government and the potential for government being the source of good guidance is so clear. In fact, a wonderful book had been written by Michael Porter and Catherine Gell on how government can get away from being rigged by the corporations, but ready to do the real work. But their book didn't go far enough.
So when you mentioned the topic of governments, politics, as if it was one, obviously every country has their own politics and government in place, but what advice would you give them, or how could they positively impact this whole ongoing regeneration?
Well, I think governments have to work for the common good. And, maybe your government says that it's working for the common good, but then you look at what they do and they're not really working for the common good. I mean, it's kind of scary, but the president of the Council on Foreign Relations, Richard Haass, he's a pretty conservative guy. He says the most serious threat to the global security of the planet is the United States. He thinks our democracy is going off the rails. And this is not a liberal guy saying this. This is a establishment guy, who's sort of you can't get any more establishment, I guess, than the Council on Foreign Relations. And he's worried that our government is not actually serving the common good. It's not interested in serving the needs of the people or the planet. So when your government is hijacked by other interests, I think this is where we need to really think on stuff. Alessandro has a comment here that I want to talk about for a second, because he says we need to rethink products and services focused on regenerative impact. Phil, when we wrote this book with Enrico, one of the things we talked about is, do companies have to stop producing products because they're not regenerative? And I think that's part of the first cycle. Do we even need this kind of consumerization that we have of everything? Phil Kotler in 1971 wrote an article about demarketing. That was sort of the first idea that marketing can be used to reduce consumption. And I think governments can encourage that by being responsible in the way they drive policy. Right now, we have policies that encourage consumption instead of, the opposite. So politics has a great role to play. And even Bill Gates says that, capitalism, the way it's practiced, blah, 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 doesn't actually advance the common good and isn't going to get us what we need. So our politics does have to become more regenerative. And we have a whole section in the book about that.
One of the things we've recognized is that we have an economy, a world economy, bent on endless growth. And of course, endless growth means endless deterioration of our temperatures and the health of nature and so on. So the real question is, should we slow down growth or make it more about sane growth? And there's even a movement called degrowth, but part of it has to do a lot with consumption. What are we consuming? We consume a lot of alcohol. We consume a lot of meat itself, and beef from the cows. And everyone knows how the consumption mix is kind of fatal to us too. And we need movements to sort of, there's another movement called minimalism. People don't think that way now, but some people are saying, there's too much stuff. I'm gathering too much stuff, and I want to go and just be in touch with my real needs, not buy the next thing because it's fashionable at the time and so on, because there's so much stuff in the world, and plastics. Everything you get is going to be covered in plastics probably, and then it's going to destroy the working of the ocean and the fish in the ocean. So these are very big concerns.
I totally agree. So maybe one of the concepts you write about in your book may help with this. You specifically write about the leadership for the common good. What exactly do you mean by it, and how can you characterize it?
Sure. That's what we call regenerative leadership. And, how do you recognize it? There's one attribute that separates sort of the regenerative leader from the traditional leader. It's their focus on the common good. The second sign is that you see that they nurture and grow other regenerative leaders. They're always teaching, always helping, and they have the zero distance to reality. Step into any business and watch their employees, and you'll be able to make out if the business is regenerative, if the CEO is not separated physically or economically or emotionally from their employees.
We often look at the pay of the CEOs, and Peter Drucker at one time, and we all turned to him for the wisdom, said that the CEO deserves more money than the average employee, maybe 10 times. Now, then he said 20 times. Okay. Now the average is 350 times the pay of the average or median worker. And there are several examples of executives who draw 1,000 times more. And this is getting worse. It's continuing. And so we have to actually start rethinking how is the wealth to be shared that is generated by the companies and the nonprofits and so on, and bring some sanity to that question. There's such an aversion to tax the rich, which I don't understand. The rich will hardly notice the amount that they are sharing with the government to go into better education, which is not very strong and high quality, better health. And it would seem to me that the people who are taxed, who have a lot of money, should want a society to have better health and better educated people. But there's a short-sightedness in the temptation to be rich and short. There is a feeling among the wealthy that they are philanthropic. That's fine. There is a lot of philanthropy, but much of it is personal. That goes back to the college you were trained in. It goes back to the museum you put your name on. So where's the organized effort to use this money for better health and better education for all? it's got too many gaps to depend on that.
And to invest into the shift that's required to move to a regenerative economy. I mean, part of this thing is that the regenerative economy actually creates value, but not just for the billionaire. It creates value for all of society and actually gives us a planet that we can still live on. And we're kind of running out of time. Go ahead.
So when you look at the interrelationship of regeneration and sustainability, and you mentioned, Christian, we're running out of time. So there's loads of companies that are currently already sustainable, however, not yet regenerative. What advice can you give to them? How can they be better?
Well, sustainability isn't enough because the circular economy isn't actually very circular. So I'll give you an example. Globally, we've been talking circular economy, sustainability, recycle your plastics for a long time. But only 15% of plastics in the world get recycled. Everything else goes into the ocean, gets pulverized, turns into molecules, and even the air we breathe is full of plastic. So it's a problem. Phil?
Well, I guess what we should do is look at the companies that are wishing to improve their performance socially as well as profitably. And one of my favorites is Unilever, because when they had their leader for 10 years, he took social responsibility as a very important part of his planning. He would tell the financial community what will happen at his company. It will go from from today's level to another level within 5 years, and he didn't want to even report quarterly on what has happened in the company, because too much of short-run planning by companies is to keep the community aware of what happened each quarter. Did they meet their goals? And that creates all kinds of restraints on management from actually doing what is good to do in the long run. And so he also made sure that a certain percentage of their profits and so on will go for the public good, the common good. So we got to find more and more companies that are sustainable companies, and they are regenerative companies. We might want to form a master list of such companies, because they ought to be honored as models that can be copied by those companies that don't have they don't have the means. Well, they have the means, but they don't have the methodology in mind on how to become more regenerative. I think what we need to do is develop a paradigm for companies that say we are sustainable companies. We now want to be regenerative companies. What steps should we take to show that this is happening? But both the three of us will be working on that problem.
And you mentioned Unilever before. What other companies come to your mind when you think of regeneration? And I know that in your book you also suggest a method how to measure the success of regeneration.
Yeah, if you want to look at companies, you look at how. I mean, we said this earlier, look at how they treat their employees. So look at the difference in behavior, for example, when employees at Starbucks want to unionize versus Ben and Jerry's. And there's no sort of similarity. One is just, union bashing and busting the whole time. The other one says, okay, great. You guys want a union? Let's work together. Let's figure it out. So, part of the problem here is companies some of the companies, aggressive companies, we want to call them, to go back to our brand activism book, aren't interested in working with their own employees. What kind of future do you have if you don't even work and care about your employees? You're not going to have a future. And forget the planet. I mean, if you can't even care about your employees, are you really going to look after the planet? No. So these kinds of companies don't deserve to exist. What do I mean by that? I'm trying to say, and Phil maybe can add something to this, is that maybe the best form of business today is no longer the corporation. That the corporation has run its course and is now an obsolete form of structure. And that we have to have new forms of business structure, like maybe co-ops, that are more democratic. I mean, one reason we're in this mess, if you think about it, is the corporation isn't democratic. It's organized like a monarchy. And so, if you want to look at the fight for unionization, for example, Starbucks is creating a crisis for itself. And so the impact on the community is the measure of its regenerative intent. Is the community better or worse because this business operates in this community? Does the business enrich or impoverish the community that it serves? And by that, I mean, of course, local, regional, national, and global. So I think we have a whole age of accountability that's coming. Either that or we have war. Phil?
Well, let's go back to the fact that we're not going to see a changeover from corporations to being cooperatives that quickly. But the main thing is, among corporations, we have quite a lot of differences. There's a group of them called B corporations. And there's a fairly rigorous set of standards that a company has to meet to be a B corporation. And much of it is signs of social responsibility taking place in those companies. Now, I also like very much the idea of employee-owned companies. Namely, the owners are the workers because they were not only paid wages, not only paid bonuses, but also paid in stock to make them feel that this is their company. To pay workers only wages leaves them out on a limb if there's a recession and so on and so forth. So employee-based companies make sense. And of course, that's the nature of a co-op. That's just another name for the cooperative. And we have to maybe alter our laws to incentivize the formation of more companies that have built-in social responsibility in their nature.
That would be great, actually. But one thing I wonder is if this was being implemented, what would be the effect on the financials, especially, but also on the target group and other stakeholders?
Well, those are good questions that will explain the opposition to any progress in regenerative marketing and business. So each company is on its own to figure out what kind of company it wants to be and make the case for support, not only from the investors, they have to get the support of the customers. What I'm happy about is that customers are increasing, especially the two generations, millennials and Generation Z, are not going to the companies that don't show their purpose more visibly. So the newest thing is companies must start not with, I am a profit-making machine, but I am a purposeful organization. And here's the list of things that I am trying to achieve and satisfy. So that's becoming very much talked about on the social media and elsewhere by younger people who are refusing big salaries from some companies that they don't think highly of and going for the companies that are regenerative and so on in some way. That's a good sign.
And then we can also look at the way in which you frame the question, because I would say the question of financial risk, is one question, but the other question is existential risk. And so we say that, the existential risk facing companies is far higher than executives realize. The second side, I'm just trying to think a little bit about how regenerative organizations sort of are based and built on community trust. And this trust is missing, right? We have this problem now because we don't trust institutions, we don't trust the TV, we don't trust the church, we don't trust our leaders. So what kind of organization can break through that? One that's close and actually part of the community. So one thing we did in Palermo that was very interesting is we ended up working with and looking at and interviewing in Palermo, a place that isn't sort of a hotbed of economic activity, but we found small companies, startups, innovative entrepreneurs who are building community-based businesses that were not focused on making money, but were focused on doing the job to be done, which is lifting people out. And I think we have 7 case studies of these kinds of companies that we discovered in Palermo in our book. But the point was that these leaders who are running these companies are not huge they're not huge companies, and perhaps they don't scale. And that's part of this thing, that these are community-based organizations. So instead of having one giant company in a community, you have 500 small, really good companies that are earning money and creating an ecosystem that's actually supporting and creating economic value and community wealth, as opposed to extractive wealth that goes to a shareholder or an investor who's sitting in another country.
We're making the argument that there is a methodology of regeneration. My own background was put very often into the question when I would deal with a community or a city: what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What are your opportunities? What are your threats? It's well known to be called the SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Now, for example, strengths. What about that city are strong points? Is it a good transportation system, a good health system? What are the weaknesses? You got to frame them. And then look outside of the community. What opportunities have you seen elsewhere that you could bring into and so on? And what threats are either imminent or ultimate that will eventually take place? So this becomes community planning and city planning at the beginning. Sometimes I'm asked by a city, we're a good city, we need more tourists. Why don't you help us do an ad campaign? And I say, no, you don't want to advertise your city, because then you're going to attract people to see how bad the city is. Right now, you're not a very good city, and all you're going to do is magnify the number of people who know that. So you start with figuring out how to be a better city before you advertise. And when you think you've already gotten to that point of being a good city, there's something to talk about. So that's at the heart of regenerative thinking too.
And we've got to think also in terms of regenerative tourism versus regular tourism. So what is regenerative tourism? And what's, what I call the smash and grab tourism, where you have a cruise ship that shows up, all these guys jump off the ship, eat a few things and jump back on the ship and keep polluting everything. That kind of tourism is going away. The cheap Ryanair kind of thing, it's happening, but it's not going to be going on for much longer. So we've got to think of sustainable regenerative tourists are tourists who aren't actually coming to a place and degrading it or have large carbon footprints, but actually take, let's say, train, spend a longer time in a place, and so you don't have sort of the burden. So we've got to shift, let's say, the economic burden of a place from tourism to other things. Part of this is, of course, AI is here, the robots are coming. And what does that do to this equation? There's a joke that we have, Phil and I, about the CEO being replaced by an algorithm, and the executives, because their job is making these decisions that are based only on spreadsheets. And if that's how they make their decisions, And of course, we can replace them with AI, and that'll make companies a lot more competitive. So again, I'm pulling everybody's chain here. Yeah. But surely there has to be a better way where we don't have to have overcompensated CEOs and overcompensated executives, but instead we have smaller and zero distance to the customer, zero distance to the community, and zero distance to nature. This is sort of we have to get back to reality, and maybe the corporation isn't exactly as intelligent an enterprise as it could be if it was closer to the ground.
I'm beginning to feel that one of the institutions that are really setting us backward are our business schools, namely the gospel of the business school and the sign of the MBA. It's basically, we're teaching you how to make more money in business. And we do talk a little bit about your social responsibility while we're teaching all this, but we don't make it primary, or at least of equal importance. We don't maybe do enough of the scenario of where the world is going in the absence, in the presence of only paying attention to profitability as the goal of business. So I think I'm excited about certain business school programs that I've heard about that are revising the whole way of educating people who want to be in business.
Thank you very much. So we have one last question before we jump over to the audience's questions. And there have been a few questions already asked, but please feel free to enter more if you want them to be answered personally by Christian Sarkar or Philip Kotler. So the last question for today is, you already mentioned the topic of marketing relating to regeneration, but how can we teach marketing nowadays so marketing strategies and operational marketing plans actually incorporate the idea of regeneration, like all of them?
What a good question, because being a marketer, I feel responsible for the good things marketing does and responsible for the bad things that it does. Marketing, I even wrote an article recently called The War Between Social Marketing and Commercial Marketing. What do I mean by that? Social marketing, it exists to solve problems in society, such as smoking and the bad health problems it creates for people who smoke, injuries that are caused in many cases, and kids drowning because they are not carefully watched by their parents or whatever. Social marketing takes a set of problems created by maybe commerce to some extent, especially the cigarette one as a best example, where we had to come down on how many people were learning to smoke and hurting themselves in the process. So my point is that marketing has its own critical area called social marketing, which is a critique of a lot of commercial marketing where it goes overboard for profits and not for social impact. Marketing however, is going to go on trying to make everything possible that anyone wants and sell all of it as much as it can. And that's the nature of marketing. That's why I postulated demarketing as using marketing in reverse, where we really want the power of marketing to work for good. For example, we are running out of water in many parts of the world. And this is a problem that Coca-Cola is very concerned with, because there's no Coke without enough water as a good source. So what can we do to get people to conserve the use of water? Don't shower every minute or every day, and make sure that in agriculture there is not a lot of water wasted. Israel has found a way to do what is called the drip method of agriculture and things like that. So basically, marketing has to be more of a good guy, and social marketing is one expression of that. Marketing is another tool, and we hope to see more of that.
So one question from the audience is, can we define regeneration marketing like a cradle-to-cradle marketing?
Oh, yeah, that's Alessandro. It's not just cradle-to-cradle. I would say, and this is actually a very important question, because there's, I think Phil wrote a book called Advancing the Common Good. This was just about 2 books ago. And I think if you just say that regenerative marketing is marketing that advances the common good, then you've got a one sentence definition of what is regenerative marketing. And then what does that mean? Of course, you have to then take those 9 dimensions of the common good. But think about it this way, right? If you look at what we do with carbon and our carbon footprints, we look at our supply chain, our entire value chain for the company, and we go, okay, where are we going to reduce carbon, right? That's how companies are doing sustainability. Or let's say pollution, let's say reducing plastics. They go, okay, let's look at our entire value chain and where can we reduce, our materials use of plastic. Well, imagine if you did that with the 9 dimensions of the common good and say, okay, let's go through our entire value chain and look at each step of the way and look at the 9 factors, the 9 dimensions of the common good. Are we hurting or are we promoting the common good across our value chain? That's sort of the message of the book. And that's sort of what marketing should be for the future.
Do you think there are any companies that would benefit to use that framework of the 9 different applications areas and doing a self-audit?
Well, see, Phil,
a self-audit. It's like, invite me to work at your company. And I'll say to them, well, have you looked at how your company affects 9 areas or so? No, our company hasn't done that. Well, I'd sure like to know more about the company and how it's and what good it's doing, what bad it's doing. And you want to be a company that's only doing good. So give me a better picture of your company.
Sure. It comes back to the job to be done. Phil, when we go, hey, what's the job to be done? Companies have started looking at sort of the product, what's the job to be done, the service, what's the job to be done. But now the purpose of the company, why do we exist? And what's our responsibility to society? Companies have to look at what is the job to be done with society? What are the societal jobs to be done that we need to be involved with? And if companies do think like that, and a few do, Patagonia decided that its entire business is now run by the foundation. The Tata Motors, the group, the entire company is actually run not by executives and shareholders, but by a charitable foundation. So this is a different model to really create the long-term thinking and embed it into the decision-making of a company. So we feel that regeneration needs to be part of that. Otherwise, there is no future. We're going to be here a few more years and everything goes up in smoke and plastic and we drown like the fish. So, and if we kill the insects, we've got all of this happening. In fact, the next book Phil and I are working on is called The Wicked 7, the 7 wicked problems of the world and how they're interconnected and what must be done to stop. And go ahead. I can see you have something to say, Julia.
Yeah, I'm just trying to make everyone happy and get their answer, their question being answered. So there's one other question. Marketing is usually measured with very specific KPIs that are easily defined. How should that work for regenerative marketing?
Good question. I think you're right. That goes back to my earlier statement that we don't know for a particular company how it has impacted in those 9 areas or whatever the number are, from the point of view of common good, the 9 common good areas. So the KPIs, the key measures we would put together for being a company that is performing well with regeneration is a good question. We should think a little more on the statistical output that we would like to see the company be able to follow.
Yeah. Well, this also goes back to the GDP. Is the GDP the measure for a company's progress, or is it the health of its citizens and, let's say, the Gini coefficient, how unequal is society? So if you're going to measure pure financial, extraction versus the well-being of the community and the people in it, then you've got 2 different ways of looking at a business. And that's why we say in the book that the corporation is actually obsolete, because it doesn't have a structure for this new way of thinking. In fact, it's not fit for purpose for what has to happen next. And we're beginning to see that. We're beginning to see lots of companies, lots of small startups, let's say, completely abandon this idea that we're just in it for the money, but they're purpose-driven businesses. That's why they're brand activists. They're here to make money, not simply to make money, but to serve people, to make a difference, to solve a problem. And I think that's why businesses exist in the first place, to solve problems, not create them. Right, Phil? This is one of the things you say.
And there's one person mentioning a study where companies were divided into good and bad marketing companies based on if they're harmful to people and environment. That this would then put the companies under pressure. What is your opinion on this, on such an approach?
Well,
Phil, you want to
go? There's fortunately good studies being done now to answer this question. Do I gain anything by investing more in social responsibility means and so on? I remember a set of studies that classified companies that were doing very much for shareholder. They were stakeholder-driven companies, and then there was another group called shareholder-driven companies. The original companies were really only had 2 groups they cared about: customers and investors. That's called being a shareholder company. A stakeholder company has at least 7 stakeholders. Not only but how about the employees? How about the planet? How about the community impact? So those studies are so solid and showing that companies that are stakeholder oriented outperform in their own industries those companies in the same industries that are just shareholder driven. So at least it's a good evidence for any company to rethink its purpose and whether it should just make money. And making money is going to kill the company eventually if it isn't in higher regard because of it sharing everything with 7 or more stakeholders who are making it a successful company.
Phil, I'd like to go back in the slides. There was one slide. If you can go back to the one that says regenerative business model. We didn't really talk about that one.
Yes.
This one.
That's the one.
What we found that these regenerative companies were doing is they had a purpose, which was really to save the community. Or I'll tell you the story really fast of Lucia Lauro and her prison-based business. So Lucia Lauro, when she was 15 years old, you guys got 2 minutes. I just don't want to go over too long, but I think it's a great story to illustrate this double loop model of regenerative business model. Lucia Lauro was 15 years old and saved these girls from being trafficked, human trafficking, being sold off into slavery, basically. And she got in trouble with the mafia and then had to sort of keep her head down. When she went to college, I'm just setting the stage for what kind of character she is. Then what happens is she comes out of college as a social entrepreneur, and they give her a job to put kids who come out of jail into productive business, find them jobs, basically. Nobody wants to hire these kids. So she says, well, if nobody wants to hire them, I'm going to create a business and I'm going to hire them. So she does. And here's what she does. She goes into the jail, builds a cookie factory in the jail, has these kids trained to start making these cookies. It's called Coti in Fragranza, which means caught in the act. And these cookies are now sold in 35 cities across Europe, maybe 30, pardon me. When they come out of jail, these kids get to work in her alfresco bistro, where she has a Michelin star chef who's training these kids to become really good cooks, really good waiters, really responsible people. But her focus is not on profits. Her focus is, how can I create the best thing possible kid that I can? How can I help this kid? So if the kid's overweight, she's going to help them lose weight and become healthy. If the kid needs to learn how to drive, she's going to help that kid learn how to drive. If the kid needs to learn English, she's going to teach that kid how to learn English. And the result of all of this is that her business is growing exponentially. She's selling panettones every Christmas all over the world now. They've got an online business. They've got in Palermo, if you go to their restaurant, it's always house full. You can't even get a seat anymore. So the point is that this is a business that's focused on helping and creating a better world for the people and its employees. And what's happened is, in the process of doing that, it has built an amazing, very entrepreneurial business. And by the way, it's a cooperative, and this woman, Lucia Lauro, earns the same as her highest paid employee. So there's no difference between her and her employees. They're really together. And I haven't seen this kind of leadership in the corporate world. I'm sorry. And so what I'm thinking is, there must be this kind of business is really the future, because it's embedded in a very small, organic way in the community that it serves. And no matter what they do, they keep going, because there's this deep connection of trust between the people, the employees, and the community. And that, to me, is regenerative. And okay, I'll shut up. That's
thanks for the example.
It's a good one. Yeah.
Just two more questions, but we're running out of time, so maybe you can just answer them briefly. One viewer says, a nation's GDP is, from her or his point of view, not a measure of human welfare. What would be more suitable?
Oh, I've worked on
I would
that
say
problem.
Let's measure the 9 elements of the common good and see.
Well, here's the thing. GDP is a measure of the amount of goods, the value of the goods and services produced by a country that year. And that includes bad goods, that cigarettes and dynamite and other things that are measured because they created some money. But we need to replace it with one of two things that have been proposed. One is called the gross happiness index. If we could really find out, our people in the country, basically, did they move up in happiness as a total or down? And the other measure would have been maybe easier to do, because it would be well-being, gross well-being of index, and are people healthier and so on. Now, the thing we noticed is that in the Nordic countries, that's Sweden and Denmark and Norway and Finland and so on, the people there are always the top countries for health. They're the healthiest people in the world, and they are the happiest people in the world. So we've got at least a model of countries, small countries, of course, that have been able to index to the indices that we use that are supplementary to GDP, to know that these things there are better measures. Now, there's also a big measure called, I don't know if it's human development level of a country, but it is, again, the metrics are around now to see more than just the GDP, to really know where a country, there are studies of which countries have the best hospitals or healthcare, the best colleges or whatever. And we need those more featured more often.
Thank you. And the last question for today, I'm going to combine two and try to make it one. Is there a risk that the regenerative vision may create a problem for a business model? And so let's see. And how can we really apply this integrated approach in a new leadership development for economy and civil society?
I missed the issue that you were pointing to that caused this question.
The first part or the second part? So the first
part. I missed the first part.
Is there a risk that the regenerative vision may create a problem for business models?
Okay, I got the question now. Okay, go ahead, Christian.
Well, yeah, I think the current business model is flawed because it kills nature, hurts your employees, and squeezes maximum value out of every drop. And basically, it's like being in the pool. I mean, you destroy everything you're in. It's not worth swimming in that pool anymore. So we have to have a new business model, and I think that's part of what this discussion has been, and certainly our book is about that there is a different way to run a business, and maybe we don't call it a business anymore. Maybe we call it a community interest corporation. Maybe we call it a local business instead of a global multinational that basically hasn't really changed since the days of the East India Company, where this company lands on your country, sucks the value out of it. In the East India Company case, it was about $60 trillion, and takes it to another country. But instead, lands in the community and makes it more wealthy, actually improves the soil that it's in, kind of like regenerative agriculture. That's the whole point of regenerative agriculture, that when you grow a crop in that soil, when you cut the crop down, the soil is actually richer. And so the question is, what does that business value look like, business model look like? And that's sort of what the book's about. We actually have the business model mapped out. We've got, I think, 7 or 8 examples of how you can have a regenerative business model. And we have a site that you can go to where we're going to put these articles online from the book. It's regenerationjournal.org. And then we have Regeneration, the Marketing Institute of it's called the Regenerative Marketing Institute, with Enrico, myself, and Phil. And that's where we do more of our sort of studies and things like that. And that's regenmarketing.org. Yeah.
Yes. And Julia, I want to add one more thing. It may sound like a number of our ideas are far off, maybe radical, maybe they even question capitalism as a system. It may be seen as, there's a lot of people who say, oh, they're trying to destroy capitalism or something with some of these radical ideas. The answer is we're just trying to make capitalism work better. And it's working better in Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and so on. These are, and we're not taking a side about should all companies be large or should all companies be small? Is there a leftist point of view and a rightist point of view? We're not talking about that. We're trying to make whatever the system is perform better in terms of key performance indicators of a good society, which is really going back to the common good, which is the set of indicators. And I just want to clarify that because it's not a political posturing at all.
Great.
Thanks, Phil.
Yes, yeah. Thank you so much to both of you. It's been very insightful. Thanks for answering our questions, but also the viewers' questions. And thanks, Christian, for being so active in the chat and for offering also for people to reach out to you directly. And
thanks, you guys.
You've been wonderful in the questions you raised and in initiating the inquiry into what does it mean to do regenerative work. And we owe it to you for doing that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And have a wonderful evening and morning.
Okay. Sure.
Thanks, Julia.
Bye.
Ciao.
Bye.
Ciao.
Thanks, Phil.
Bye. Bye, everyone.